and CEO of the Business of Fashion. Welcome to BoF Live. It's our latest conversation. Since the beginning of the lockdowns, we've been sitting down with people to talk about everything that's going on in the world. It's a very complicated world at the moment. And due to popular demand, I have with me here today Aniyia Williams, who spoke at our inaugural BoF Professional Summit. And her talk on building racial equity from the ground up was such a hit. And there were so many people asking to hear more from Aniyia. So she has kindly agreed to join us once again to just go a bit deeper on the topics that we discussed last week. And so welcome, Aniyia.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be back. I was like so humbled and excited about the response to last week's talk. So it's my pleasure to be here today.
Thank you.
The conversation. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, last time we didn't get much of an opportunity to understand your background and how you ended up doing the work that you do now. So, in the first instance, I'd love for you to just explain, how you got here and,
how did we get here?
How did you get here?
That's a great question. So I'm like, it's such an interesting, kind of windy path in thinking about how I got here today. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about me is that I actually started my, I don't know if you say my career, but there were like many trajectories that my life has had that kind of then navigated to a new path, and that was the new thing. And so it started with me kind of really as an artist, as a musician, as a singer. I trained for a very large portion of my life as a classical and operatic singer, and so I've spent a lot of time on stages. That's
opera queenie.
That's why I'm opera queenie. Yes. When I created all of my like social media handles, like my first Twitter handle, I was still an opera singer at that time. And so, but that went a different path when I realized I would like to have a job that has like health insurance and benefits and a steady paycheck and not having to audition all the time for my money. And so I ended up kind of going into arts administration. I actually started working at arts nonprofits in fundraising. And that was actually the culmination of a lot of things that I did when I was in college. But one of the actual key moments there that fused those things together was I was in student government when I was in college. I went to Penn State University, and I was the diversity chair of their student government. So even when I was, basically just coming of age, I was already kind of involved in the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the projects that I was leading when I was at school was actually to start an endowment fund for a scholarship that would basically go towards students who were doing work towards diversifying the university. And so that was how I first started to get familiar with the world of fundraising and major gifts. And that was when I was like, oh, maybe this is like a job I could have that's in the arts, and I could still be connected to the things I love. And so a lot of that experience then kind of came into play when I graduated from school. I went into major gifts fundraising. And then after that, I met a guy who's now my husband, but he's a software engineer. And after a few years of us being together, he got recruited to work at this, hot new startup in the Valley called Yammer. And we decided to quit our jobs and move 3,000 miles away from everyone we knew and everything we knew to California. And we haven't looked back. And actually not too long after that, Yammer ended up getting acquired by Microsoft. So it actually ended up being one of the kind of bigger success stories for unicorns in the Valley. And then that also changed the trajectory of my life. When I moved here, I transitioned from nonprofit fundraising to like, I want to see what this tech thing is about. This is like there is somewhere in this for me, and I need to find out what it is. And so I got my foot in the door at this startup called Voxer. And at the time I was like way overqualified for this job. I was like, I just want to get my foot in the door. I want to meet new people. I didn't know anyone. So I started as like a part-time office manager, coming off of being like a major gifts fundraiser at the job I had before. And I was just like, let me just see like what needs to be done. I just started jumping in, and I learned so much about the tech industry. I learned so much about kind of how things move around here, and just the whole culture around startups, where there's always way more things that need to be done than there are people to do them. And if you jump in and you're like doing that thing and you're good at it, like that becomes your thing. And so it's just like, it's an industry where opportunity is really boundless in a lot of ways. And I really bought into that. Like, this is going to come full circle in a moment. Like, I bought into that hand over fist, because my experience for the first few years of moving and living in the Valley very much kind of like seemed to jibe with the sort of narrative of what happens when you're in startups, and like success is just like there for the taking and all of that. But we didn't realize how we also were just very lucky at the time, because then what the real moment came a few years later. I was actually running the marketing team at Voxer. So I navigated, kind of moved my way through that. I was on the executive team, but I also knew that it was time for me to move on. And I had this idea, because I was working, so Voxer is a company that makes an audio application that basically does voice messaging. And I was using audio all the time. I'm a musician, so I was listening to music all the time. I was away from my family, so I was on the phone all the time. So I was always using my headphones. And I had an iPhone. I just hated having like this like rat's nest of wires that was buried at the bottom of my bag all the time. I was like, I want to wear them on my body. But like, I spent too much, like, this doesn't happen by accident. I don't want like rubber wires like all over, you know? So I was like, I want my electronic to actually be a piece of jewelry that I can wear. And I actually feel bad now that I didn't put it on for this, because it's like, and I don't have one near me in this room. But you can look it up on tinsel.me and see what actually came of that, because I was like, I want to be able to wear my headphones as a necklace that no one would be able to tell was anything other than a necklace until I take it out and you see that there's headphones. And I went to the CEO of the company I was working at the time, and I told him, I was like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing next, but I do have this idea, and you know people, can you like introduce me to some people who know how to, you know, design physical products? And he was like, sure, I know a guy. And he introduced me to a friend of his, who then also was like, yeah, like, I'm going to tell you all the things that you need to know about manufacturing like a hardware product, but you should know this is really hard. You should know that in the tech industry, like, people don't like hardware. They don't like women. They don't like fashion. Like, all of these things are going to like play against you. And I'm like, you know, I'm always up for a challenge, so bring it on. And he was like, but you should get Tom in on this, because I think he would actually back this, and I'll voice support for you. And between those two, it ended up becoming real. Tom committed to becoming my first angel investor. His friend became my advisor and helped with making my first introductions to people who could make this thing a reality. And so from there, I became my own tech entrepreneur. I'm like, Tom, I'm going to quit working for you. I'm going to start this company. You're going to own part of it. It's going to be amazing. And he was just like, I've seen what you can do working for me. Like, if anybody's going to make this thing happen, it's going to be you. So like, I'll put my money on that. And that was the beginning of me creating and becoming a tech founder. And so all of those stories that were in my head about how this works in the Valley, and like, it doesn't matter, like it's a meritocracy, rolling my eyes at that now. And then actually coming out the gate and like doing the thing and building the thing, and like coming up with completely different like outcomes than I was expecting, and definitely different outcomes than my white male counterparts. I definitely know that there like are people who are out here who are also white males and they struggle with it too. But generally, like, not as much of a problem when you can see, you know, guys who have virtually like a back of the napkin kind of idea and getting millions of dollars of funding. And then someone like me who has already like basically reversed the rotation of the earth and is sitting in front of an investor who's just like, I just don't really see the opportunity here. And I'm like, wow, okay, really? And so really starting to become acquainted with what some of these challenges were. And also just starting to realize that there was just opportunity that was being missed. And a lot of that was very much based in bias. And a lot of that was very much based in very closed networks, and like how so much of getting things done in business in general, but also here in the Valley, it's really on the strength of relationships And if you're not in that club and people don't know you, like they're not gonna put their neck out there. They're not gonna unlock the resources for you. And so I also just, as I was doing all these things, I became really fascinated with why is that a thing? Because like, I know I'm awesome. And I'm like, I have done things that a lot of people cannot do. And yet, and like what they always would say, especially when they're talking about early stage founders, is that it's about the founder, right? Like at that stage, you're investing in an idea, and that idea, the belief of that idea, it's in the team, it's in da-da-da, can they pull it off, yada, yada. And I'm just like, I mean, I'm a fairly impressive person, but like you're looking at me right now and you're clearly not seeing that. And I just kind of became really familiar with the fact that we just all have these blind spots, you know, and really kind of wanted to do more investigating of what does it look like for us to be able to start to grapple with those things and to redirect ourselves, right? Give ourselves the tools to do better. The other thing that I would actually also add, and this is a really important part that I don't really get a chance to talk a lot about, but when we were going into production, actually it was when we had just finished our first production run, and we're like getting ready to ship out the first order of necklaces. Like we went all the way to like actually shipping product, which a lot of hardware startups do not get to that stage. And like I had also had a baby because I got pregnant like 6 months after I started the company. That was not a part of the plan, but it was like, okay, 2 startups at once. Here we go. And just also just the whole journey of becoming a mother while also kind of giving birth to this product. There's so many things to discover there. But the important part was that there was just so much pressure and like tension and like an unbalance that started to really build up within my relationship with my husband. He had been just so patient. I mean, he still is, like, he's a heroic husband. And like, I don't like what it's like to be married to an entrepreneur, period, but also someone who's manufacturing a product in China and has to actually physically go there while she's still breastfeeding an infant is a whole other level of husbandry. And so, but like but he's human, you know? And so there was a whole like really rough patch that he and I had to come through. And where we were like breaking down, where like things were breaking down in our relationship to each other was actually where I feel like the discovery happened for me with all of the things that I was able to bring to people last week. And I mean, we are talking about this through the lens of racial equity, but the reality of it is it's the same things that you have to connect with in order to be able to have a beautiful marriage and friends, excuse me, and friends who want to be around you and to try to approach equity in the workplace. It all comes from the same, excuse me, it all comes from the same filter, right? It all comes from the same skill set. It all comes from the same ability to recognize, as I was talking about before, these blind spots that you have and to learn how to be in relationship with people. I think like one of the biggest like epiphanies that I had during all this journey was that like, there was this situation that I feel like I kept kind of running against, where it was like realizing that I could be right or I could like be in relationship with a person. You know, like it's like, yes, you can be right and alone because nobody wants to be around you because you feel like it's so important for you to win every time. I think that there was another part of me that was very much rooted in this understanding. Like I had this moment where I realized that I was also trying to extend this reality to my husband that was my reality. I was trying to like treat him and expect from him to make the decisions and to think about things in the same ways that I did. And it wasn't until I really started to like understand and accept that he has had a completely different experience in living. He has had a completely different set of relationships. And all of those things inform how we show up and how we interpret things and how we respond to things. And it just wasn't fair for me to be like, he should be doing this because I don't live in his reality. He's got a different reality than mine. And so I started to understand that what was really important was, how do I create a shared reality with him where like these two things kind of merge, and it's like a space where we are able to understand each other and communicate and come to solutions for like problems that come up. And realizing that if you look at that at a macro level, in a lot of ways, that is what's happening. Like this very talk that we're doing right now, it's the same shit. It's just in a different kind of context.
It's so interesting that you say that, because when I was reflecting on your presentation today, a lot of the words in there, perfectionism, defensiveness, fear of open conflict, binary thinking, these things are not just applicable in the context of, diversity, inclusivity, and racial equity. They're kind of applicable in a wide variety of contexts. So, but before we get to the presentation, I want to start with the basics, because, throughout your experience, starting at Penn State and then, in the Silicon Valley and working your way up through these various technology companies and then starting your own company, this common thread of diversity, inclusion, and equity has kind of remained a consistent part of your journey. So in the first instance, when you're trying to define what that means to people, how do you define it? Because people are throwing around these words so liberally right now.
Yeah.
But, how do you explain what that really is in terms of what we're trying to achieve?
That is a fantastic question. I've never thought about it, but I can tell you what I think. Like, I would say that it is, it's belonging. Like at its core, I think it's belonging, and it is like allowing for the presence of all different kinds of things, different shapes, different forms, different ways of thinking, different backgrounds, and like allowing all of those to belong in the same space together, and finding ways for them to be able to, again, be in relationship with each other. It's so funny too, because related to that, I was having a conversation with my husband the other day, and he was saying that all there is us like trying to figure out what we're going to do with each other. Like that is living, and it's so true in so many ways. And so I think that when we ask like what is DEI like really, I think that that's what it is all about. It's about us trying to figure out what are we going to do with each other. How are we going to be in relationship with each other? What is our relationship to each other going to be? And like, is that the most fair, equitable, like representation of that it can be? Got it.
So, some of the challenges that you've outlined, especially in the Valley, those are not exclusive to Silicon Valley. As we know from the conversations that are happening around the world right now, these issues around equity and inclusion, it's like everywhere. And I think one of the biggest realizations, for me personally, is that this systemic issues around racism, around inclusion, they are present in every little part of everything that we do, in every interaction we have, and especially in the workplace and in the fashion industry. As I'm sure you know, this conversation has been taken a whole new level in recent weeks, as it has in other industries, I'm sure. But our industry is finally having, I think, some of the most honest and open conversations around the topic. When you look across these different sectors and experiences that you've had, what are the things that are getting in the way? What's blocking us from creating that sense of belonging in these different aspects of our lives, in different industries and different sectors all over the world?
Yeah. One, I think it's a beautiful thing that these conversations are finally happening. They're hard conversations to have. I know they make people so incredibly uncomfortable. But as I was saying in the presentation last week, like it's a necessary part of the process. The discomfort is actually like a key ingredient to getting to the other side. But I think the biggest thing that gets in the way is self-interest, like in a way. And I say that phrase and it means a lot of things. But I think of the fact that we're constantly making choices every day. right? And I think like the choices that we make can be as minor as, you know, am I going to have juice or coffee? Right. But you're like, when you're deciding if you're going to have juice or coffee, you're actually even weighing like a calculus in your head of like, what's the benefit of me doing coffee versus juice? Like, do I want the extra sugar? Like, yeah, it's going to taste good. It might make me feel good for a moment, but like, I'm on this low carb diet. It's probably not the right choice. You know what I mean? So it's like, you're thinking through these things, and whatever those filters are, like, tend to kind of be something that ultimately like comes back in service of yourself, especially if it feels like a very small decision. Like, you can own that and like do the thing that you want to do. Fuck it, if I want to have the carbs and drink the juice, I'm going to drink the juice, right? And so these are, I would say that like even something like that, where you show up and you're actually like in a more complex conversation, maybe about, I don't know, I'm making this up, but someone said a like an offensive phrase in a Slack company chat, and you're trying to figure out, you know, and this person is like a high ranking like person at the company. And you now have to grapple with what you're going to do about that, right? And like power comes into play, because it's not like this is someone who works in the mailroom. This is someone who's highly visible. This is someone who makes very big decisions about the company. And you have to also show that this is something you care about. How do you handle that situation, right? You're making a choice even there. And so I think that the best that we can really do is to start to like, knowing that we are inherently, you know, self-interested. And when I say self-interested, I think a lot of that comes back to a place of preservation and survival, and what things like our brains have kind of coded as being associated with that. And that constantly is actually our filter. So I feel like what is going to happen, and I'm going to get like a little bit, I don't know, woo-woo probably, but I'd say that, you know, I keep thinking about this idea of these like kind of different stages of human evolution. I might have mentioned this last week during the talk too, where it's like, okay, you know, we come into like inventing these new ways of existing and surviving, and those things have gotten increasingly more complex, from like, you know, making tools and to cut meat or whatever, to like inventing fire, to being able to, you know, have the whole industrial revolution, to where we are now with computers, and us being able to be an ocean apart from each other, and in real time having a conversation and seeing each other face to face, right? Like all of these advancements that we've had. I have this feeling that, you know, this next sort of level that we have to kind of go into as humans and as a civilized society, if you will, is one where we have to be able to really start to understand how we work inside. Like our minds are really like the most powerful tool that we have. It is the thing that separates us from, you know, pretty much the rest of the animal kingdom. And like but we are not familiar with it. It's a thing that we have and we use every day, but we haven't really become as acquainted with it as we should. And it exists and looks differently for every person. And so that's why I always kind of come back to this like personhood, this self-discovery, this willing to be able to learn and grow and change, and to really do the investigation of yourself on a regular basis. Because as I was saying, like so much of it is self-interest. And if you're not even cognizant of what your motivations are, you're constantly making choices that might not actually be aligned with who you think you are. Like, so you might have an idea of who you want to be and what you think you're doing to show up in the world, but you don't actually have the evidence to corroborate that that's true. And so a lot of that is giving people the tools to kind of understand and do that self-investigation, and then being able to actually have a framework to define, like, these are the things that are important to me. This is the person that I want to be. This is who I believe people like, how I believe people should show up in the world. It gives you a filter, a compass to start to make those choices and do those in the ways that are actually aligned with you kind of becoming. So it's like a self-actualization in a lot of ways. So I think that like, to answer your question with a lot of words, one would be self-interest. That's what I think is getting in the way. And two, I think like the counter to that is just giving people the tools to kind of do the self-discovery and allowing them to really define who they believe that they should be, and giving them a way to constantly have like what I like to call like a feedback loop of like, is that actually what's bearing out? Because the other thing that I've learned about people, and I told you, like, a lot of this kind of led me on this journey of just like, I want to learn about how do people work? Like, why do we do the stuff that we do, right? And a lot of that is also just knowing that we function by making predictions all the time, right? Like we are like our brains are prediction machines. And so we're constantly, when we're doing that thing where we're like, okay, I'm making a choice. We're actually also trying to make a guess about what's going to happen in either case. In some cases, this is a thing that's happened so many times, you don't have to even question it. You know that if you're drinking the orange juice, you are drinking sugar and there are carbs and calories in it, right? That is a proven fact. But when you're in a situation like the one I mentioned, the complex one where, okay, a senior level person like messed up and you have to communicate something and do something about it, what do you do? How do you handle that? You're also making a prediction there as you're kind of deciding what choice you're going to make. You're making a prediction about, if I do this, people will respond in this way, or if I do that, people will respond in that way. If I fire him, this like landslide of crazy things is going to happen. And so like, those are all of the things that we're always kind of trying to reduce that gulf between like us being certain about what's going to happen and like what actually is going to happen. And that same thing is true about who we are. We always want to reduce that gulf between who we think we are and what we're actually doing. But we have to actually have like a framework or a tool or a system to be able to evaluate, to know if that's happening. And so that's kind of what I personally try to optimize for all the time, is like reducing the surprise between those two things.
That's really powerful. And it makes me think about something you said earlier about blind spots.
Yeah.
And when you talk about self-examination, it kind of starts with the blind spots. You know, we've been using, or people have been using the word unconscious bias a lot recently. And let's start there as a kind of a starting point, because, you know, as you said, you know, we all have our blind spots, every single one of us, through the experiences we've had. It sounds like you discovered that in your relationship with your husband as well. You figured out how your own experiences have kind of shaped you. And because you only know your own experience, and that's the lens and filter through which you've seen everything, it's kind of this, like, as you said, very uncomfortable moment when you start examining yourself and you start realizing and understanding, actually, there are so many other ways that I could think about this that I hadn't even considered.
Exactly.
So when you think about unconscious bias, for people out there who are on this journey of self-examination and trying to kind of narrow the gap of who they want to be and who they really are, how do you like, what advice do you have to offer for people?
Yeah. I would say that in that moment, and I like to use the word surprise because that's kind of the phrase they use in like information theory, if you want to nerd out about like artificial intelligence. But I think about that surprise, like that's the thing that is like bringing that discomfort. And so when you have these moments, basically like you have the option to do two things. One of them is to like act to make it true, right? Like you can, and acting to make it true is, you know, doing the thing where like it could be denial. I mean, that's a thing. I'd say that's probably one of the more common act to make it true, is that you just reject like this new piece of information. I don't believe it, and therefore I don't have to respond to it. And so there's that. But the other option, which I think is more preferable most of the time, is that you update your mental model. Like you have to like then take that piece of information and say, oh, okay, I thought it worked like this, but actually it can also work this way. Like this thing is also true. And I think that that's kind of one of the really key pieces when we're thinking about these kind of different realities we're living in, is that that reality is true to that person, right? Like even if it is not grounded in what we can call like a verifiable fact, so to speak, like they believe it and therefore it's true to them. And if you try to tell them that that's not real, like we're instantly programmed to reject that. And so I think that what's the best thing to do is to just kind of create this environment where someone can kind of come around to understanding that themselves and be kind of incentivized to actually accept that like, oh, there is more than one possibility that actually exists here. And that, you know, I can respond to that accordingly. So I think that really that's the thing. It's like updating your mental model when you have those moments. And I think it takes a while to maybe process what does that mean? And what are all the implications for the things that I thought I knew, like before this moment? That's what takes time. That's all of the moments of you working through the discomfort. So if you remember the diagram that I put up last week, and it had like the kind of safe zone, the like learning zone, the different zones. And so it's like, you know, if that discomfort is like when you're first having that reckoning, as you're processing that and starting to really update and understand like, oh, so if that's true, then probably also that is true. If that is possible, probably also that is possible. It starts to then, so then when you're in that last zone, it's like you've now got just this expanded thinking of what is happening. And it's also broadening your worldview. It's broadening how you can show up in relationship with people, because now you have more archetypes in your brain of like how people can respond, how people can show up, how people believe things, how other people experience things that are beyond your own personal experience. And it's so critical to kind of creating connection between people. So like when you actually do want to establish trust in a relationship with someone, like you have to establish that kind of connection. And that really only comes by you really validating and them believing that you respect and understand their experience in the world.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot about the word pluralism when I start thinking about these different perspectives, right? It's like one of my favorite words because, you know, so many people can be in the same situation and perceive things differently. And actually, all of the perspectives are valid. And for me, a big part of the conversations that need to happen is to help people understand that there are these other perspectives and all of them are equally valid as well.
They are. And I say that knowing that like I can go on Twitter right now and find all kinds of like right-wing craziness that somebody is reading and like, oh yeah, that is definitely true. That jives with everything I have experienced and know about in the world that I live in, right? And it's scary and terrifying. But like if you're actually talking about like how do you show up, how are we going to like have a conversation that's productive? It has to start from me again, like validating what your experience is like, and it's so hard for us to do. This is again a part of like us kind of getting to that next evolutionary level is like us being able to like cognitively know that dissonance is there in your mind, but pushing past it to kind of like, and I think so much of it also kind of comes down to a place of humility and accepting that you don't know everything, you have not experienced everything. And that's again, like what allows us to start to like shine light on the blind spots that we have. But yeah, it's one of those things where you're like, okay, like all of the actions that I'm going to take to kind of figure out why this person like is living in this reality is like the thing that can come after that. But the first thing that you have to do is like validate it. And I think like it's also just like I've watched this happen in conversations with people where you can really be in a very tense moment. By the way, this doesn't always work because if you're in an emotional state, like sometimes the emotion, the fight, flight, freeze, it takes over and a productive conversation cannot happen in that moment. You have to like separate and then come back together and try again. Like that happens even here in this house, that happens. And like with two people who very much love each other and want to be in a relationship with each other, you gotta like, this is not the moment for that. So, but assuming that is the right moment, like, and sometimes when things actually are pretty charged up, like you can de-escalate those things very often just by like hearing, listening, telling the person like, and again, that's why I kind of talked about like the, listen, mirror, and validate. So like listening to what the person is saying and then saying to them what you think you heard. Like, it sounds like ba, 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 and like allow them to confirm if you got right what you think you heard, right? So that's like one of the steps in creating a shared reality. It sounds like this is what you're saying. It sounds like this is what you're feeling. Like, is that right? And then them confirming it and you validating the fact that it's okay for them to feel that and that they are warranted in that, because in their reality, it makes sense to them and they are not going to want to move to the part where you try to diffuse, or not diffuse, but you try to resolve or like create a solution for whatever is happening in that moment until you have at least said that, like, I see that and I realize that if that happened to me, I would also be upset about that. I know it's also really hard to do that if you're also feeling emotional. Like, that's part of the growth of like being able to do that, because like I was saying, but like believing is free. It's actually like the cheapest thing you can do. It's just really hard because it kicks us a little bit in the ego to do it when we disagree with someone. But if you can, then there's like a productive conversation on the other side of it.
So let's take this now to like a professional environment, a work environment where companies throughout the fashion industry are trying, to create a better sense of belonging. And fashion companies tend to be based in big cities like London and New York and Paris, which are in a way microcosms of the world. And so everyone that's coming into those workspaces, they all have different perspectives. They might come from different, races, different genders, different nationalities, different religions. How is it that we create, if you're advising a leader that's trying to build this sense of inclusion and belonging into their own organizations, how can you bring such disparate groups of people together and create a truly pluralistic environment where everyone's opinions are not necessarily everyone agrees with everyone all the time, because that's impossible, but where everyone's opinions are valued and respected?
Yeah, I think one of those things definitely comes from, like, as you even just hinted at, it's first like the acceptance of knowing that conflict is inevitable in the workplace. It's going to happen. I think that the other thing that I'm going to kind of get into after this, I can also really see how this might very easily sort of chafe, if you will, against like kind of corporate policies and how corporations are formed and how they exist and how they have worked since we can remember. And there's a lot there that, I've been a part of a lot of conversations to that degree about, just in general, like, what does it look like for business culture to change? We already know here in the United States, at least, like there are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies who have been talking about how they kind of need to be more responsible and blah, blah, blah. And like, I think there's still a very big question mark about what does that actually mean? Because like there is, like they can be competing forces. The thing that is actually the right thing to do, if we're talking about really acting in alignment with values, and having that pluralistic view as you're talking about, and then like what's on paper in terms of like how we're meeting our like profit goals at the end of the quarter, and like what does that demand, and so people balancing those things is going to be a really interesting exercise, and I'm sure it's going to be different at every company. So I wanted to like acknowledge that. But so one, I think, is to know and accept the fact that conflict is going to happen. I also know that most companies tend to be set up for lots of reasons. Like, I'm not saying that this is dumb, but I'm saying it is in competition with like the kind of outcomes we want, that like they have, like their HR departments, for example, are really more equipped to try to like keep the company like from being liable for things versus like
risk management.
We're all here for understanding and belonging. It's like, I am here to document this incident happening so that if it is in a court of law, we have the ability to show that we didn't do anything that was wrong, right? And so I think that like the whole messiness of us kind of trying to navigate and figure out and find those comfortable spaces for people can have some real dissonance there. But like, for instance, I can think about in specifically like a group of people who, like one of the groups of people who a couple of the groups of people that I've co-created like initiatives with, have actually kind of gone back, even through like having, dissonance happen between us or having conflicts between us that felt really bad for everyone. Once we like acknowledge, we're like, you know what, conflict is going to happen. Let's actually talk about what we're going to do when conflict happens, and like designing that together and actually writing it down so that like actually even one of the things that we have done in two of the groups that I'm in is we even kind of created like a safe word, so that like if something escalates to a point where someone is just really had it, like you say that word and like we are agreeing that this conversation is going to get tabled and we're going to come back to it. Like, it's just too hot. Nothing productive is going to come out of this, either because I'm recognizing I'm too upset, or like, the energy is just not where it needs to be. Safe word, put it down, cool off, come back. And then just, so that was like one thing, but also just like us kind of calling out in some ways, what are the things that we know actually even speak to like triggers that make us really mad or make us really upset. So, you know, as in one of these groups, I am the only Black woman, and there are things that are triggers for me because I am a Black woman in America. There are things that people can say to me in an interaction that, like, even though I know that it's a thing, it's like when it happens, it just like, it gets to some primal part of my brain. And when it happens, I'm like, oh, no, that is not like, I turn into a different person. We are not like, it is, you know, like shots have been fired and I am about to like go in. Do you know what I mean? And so it's like knowing that I can at least identify those things and share those things with people so they know that like, oh, you know what? The other thing that has also been really helpful is to like realize that we're always telling ourselves these stories. And like articulating those out loud. I think I mentioned this in the talk last week too, that I love like Brene Brown. She kind of does that thing, like the story I'm telling myself, because I also realized that in conflict, when we're in the workplace, when people are able to articulate the story that they're telling themselves and they can have somebody respond to it, sometimes actually in even articulating the story, you realize that like, really, is that a thing I should be upset about? Like, is it that deep? And then there's the other part of it too, that people can be like, oh, if that's what you thought was happening, I could see why you're like really mad about that. But let me like try to actually tell you what I was thinking when that happened. And like, you might realize that you were just in two completely different places. And that it actually wasn't what you thought it was at all that made you upset. So it's like having all of these tools, I think naming and knowing that conflict are inevitable, and then kind of creating a process for resolution around that is really, really important. It's so important because I just think like bar none, there's a lot of people who are out there that have been groomed to avoid conflict. And I don't think that we should go trying to stir it up by any means necessary. Like, I think that we just need to be prepared for what we do when that happens. And like having people who all kind of come in and agree and have shared expectations of what happens in resolution when these moments come up before you're in the tense moment is really, really helpful, you know, because that allows people to buy into the process. And then when it's happening, it's a mechanism of accountability for everyone involved to say, this is what we said we were going to do. And then if something happens and like what you have on paper doesn't really fit that framework, then you can acknowledge that, like, you know what, we didn't really account for this situation to happen, but like, here's what we think, we're seeing. How to, like, is this the right thing to do next time when this happens? Like, I think, again, like leaving some room for that to evolve over time, because I feel like if there's one thing that I also have really seen about like when we watch kind of humans work in groups, is like that trust factor is really big. And if you are at least having some level of transparency, even about not knowing all the answers, but you like agree and you seem to like actually show up in a way where you're trying to do the best and be as like have as much integrity to that promise that you made as possible, people will give they have a lot more forgiveness and allowance there when they feel like, okay, they have not figured it out, but they're really trying, and like, okay, we realized there was a gap here and now we're trying to address it. Like, these are the things that give people all the signals that even though it's not perfect, even though this is uncomfortable, or even though I didn't like the outcome that happened, this was what we all agreed to. So do you know what I mean?
Yeah. You know, one other thing that you said last week that kind of stayed with me, and I could see that it resonated with people on social media too, because I saw people typing it out on Twitter and other places. You said, you are not going to hire your way to diversity, inclusion, and equity. And I find that a really powerful statement, but I also find it challenging because, you know, a lot of people right now in companies are kind of exposing their makeup, and, you know, they're saying, you know, this is who we are as an organization by gender or race or, you know, whatever other categories. And, you know, the next natural step for many of them is say, oh, well, we're not truly representative. So when you say you're not going to hire your way to diversity and inclusion. Clearly hiring is part of it, but there's clearly more to what you were saying there. And I'd love to go deeper on that with you.
Yeah. And it's funny because I'm like, that actually was a bit that came up. Like that statement was something that had come up in conversation I was having with some friends as well. And it definitely stuck with me. And, you know, in the context of me saying it, I think in a way, like, it's a little bit facetious in the sense of, you know, you absolutely do want to continue to hire a diverse group of people, right? Like, it's not to say like, don't bother. But what it means is that, like, you know, the hiring really alone is not enough. I think that, you know, there's the whole conversation that can be had literally just about the hiring process, right? Like how you're sourcing, how you're taking people through the evaluation of whether they're going to be a fit for your company, and what happens when you make them an offer. But the thing I was really hitting at last week was around the environment that exists to support those people before you bring them in. Because I think that it's easy to kind of look at the numbers and say, well, we're only like 3% like of and we really like, I mean, there's 30% of those people live in this geographic area just around this like office, right? And like there's probably something wrong there. So we should increase that number. So I think, like, you know, that's a good thing. That's a good kind of logical train of thought to have. But the other thing too is like the reasons why it would be 3% versus like where there's a 30% population of those people around your office. Like, you also have to grapple with that and resolve that. Like, it's not good to bring people who are different into an environment that's very homogenous, and people are like have not done the work or attempted to like be accommodating or really understand what it means to have that kind of diversity around them, because it just ends up being really harmful and toxic to the people that you're bringing in. It, like, they will constantly be an other in that environment. And that, again, back to the belonging thing, like, nobody wants that at work, especially when you feel like you have nobody who's backing you for either the wins that you're having and the work that you're doing and recognizing the value that you're contributing to the company. Nobody wants to be in that position. The other thing is when you actually have something happen where maybe you made a mistake, it makes people feel like they're at risk for like the very smallest kind of infraction could result in them having like a catastrophic result that could hurt their career or their position at the company, where someone else who's just kind of a part of the culture and they just fit in and people like them, like, it's like, oh yeah, whatever, it's not a big deal. But then when you do it, it's like, oh, we gave you a 0 on your performance review because that just was not acceptable. And like, to you, like, to person reviewing them, it might not even seem like that's like biased or wrong, right? Again, like, you have to kind of recognize those types of double standards that happen, and it's very much cultural. And so back to what you were talking about with pluralism, like, I think all of those things absolutely come into the picture. So it's really about, and I say this mostly like at the leadership level, the leaders of the company have to be living that truth. It's the same thing, like, we're watching this happen in the United States. We do not have a good role model as the president of the United States of America right now. I'm just going to leave that there. But we see the ways in which these kind of cultural attributes trickle down. He is also the most visible person, not only here, like globally. He's incredibly visible. And like, we even can, like, for better or worse, watch the like process of him making decisions and the filters that he's using. And like, there are just like, not enough people have really done the work, I would say, to know like if that actually feels like the right thing, the fair thing, the thing that they can show up in who they believe to be thing, to question that. And so it sets a precedent for behavior. And I think the same thing happens within companies. They're like little mini universes where if the leadership is not buying into those ideals, they're not doing the work, they're not holding themselves accountable, I don't know how you can expect everyone else to do that too. They won't. And then the other part of it is like, how do you think about incentives? I think one of the other things that I have seen really from you know, people that I've talked to who work in larger companies, like where they see like DEI type of things become really effective is when they actually get tied to someone's compensation, or when they actually get tied to how they are being rated. Because the other thing is that it's just too often like a extracurricular activity for people to engage in the work around diversity in a workplace where it's like, oh yeah, and let's try to make this diverse, and like we'll like give you a great pat on the back, but it's not like we're going to give you an extra bonus, or it's not like you're going to have to take a 2% pay cut if you don't meet this target of how many people we're supposed to bring in. And if people aren't saying that, you know, when they were having their meetings with you, that you were there and you were listening and you were supporting them, or whatever things that you've decided are valuable like behaviors you want your leaders to have. But if they have no skin in the game, like, why would they do that? That's just like extra work. Like, I'm not even getting paid for that. Why would I do that? Right. So how you think about incentivizing employees to do that is also really key.
Yeah. You know, we're almost out of time. And I wanted to conclude and go back to that individual journey. And you said something really powerful towards the end of your talk last week. You said, figure out what role you can play. You can commit to a lifetime of practice. You will never finish this journey. Are you going to be a leader of change? Can you talk more about what you mean there and like why this journey never ends?
Yeah. It's funny because I think about journey. I like the word journey, and I think some people don't like the word journey because a journey kind of implies that it has an end. And I'm like, but it's a never ending journey. And it's like, and in a way, like, I actually think that it's like a journey that goes inward. Like it's like going deeper and deeper inside of yourself. I wish that I had the words to really like adequately describe how scary it is to go and do a journey of self-discovery. You are going to find things that you do not like about yourself. You're going to find things, you're going to go back and think about actions you have taken in the past that are going to make you very uncomfortable and sad and disappointed and probably ashamed of like the ways in which you have shown up in situations. But like, I also really strongly believe that those are the things that make the conditions possible for you to do better. Like, if you don't have the bad stuff, like, you won't really have like a counterpoint to know how to do the good stuff. And so I think, you know, so anyway, so like, yes, it is a lifelong journey. And I think that the other part of it too, like if we go back to kind of the 4 stages of kind of learning that we went through, and like, it actually probably should be, you know, cyclical. Like, it should kind of be like a cycle, because even when you get to the place of like having a mastery of a skill set or a really deep understanding of something, you're going to uncover another facet of something that you didn't know. Right. And so I think that like, this is my advice specifically to white people too, which is that like, I think that it's good to kind of get to this place to work on that and like feel like you can get to a place of confidence. The thing that I always like worry about with white people in particular, because I find that they are not as used to being in situations of discomfort as other people, that it's not as much of a regular part of their existence as other people. And so there's definitely always a desire to run away from that. It's that knowing that like you are going to have to experience this for the rest of your life, and being okay with that it's going to be a cycle that's going to continue for the rest of your life. But every time you do that and you come out on the other side of it, like, the rewards are boundless. Like, you are going to be such a better person. You're going to find that you're able to engage with people in ways that you just never could. It's going to bring such a richness to your life. And to your experience and to the relationships that you have. And the other thing that I didn't mention last week that also is probably pretty key is that the quality of human life, like the quality of our lives, how we, like, the thing that actually matters the most to us and how we think about, was this a life worth living, is actually like the quality of the relationships that we have with other people. That is actually the thing that matters. It doesn't really like matter that much how much money you make and all the other things, the material things. Relationships with other human beings, that is what actually matters. And so being able to do this work, being able to do this self-discovery, it makes you show up in relationship to other people in a better way. It like if you think about like fidelity, it makes you, it's like very high fidelity version of you right? A lossless version. And like that's the thing that it just bears such beautiful fruit, and how you can kind of start to exist alongside other people, and like what you can do for each other and what people can do for you. It's like this very odd thing, actually, that, again, to use my marriage as an example, I like to draw on that because it's the one example I can easily point to people to tell them that, like, I want this to work, right? Like, if there's any relationship that I really, really want to work, and I really like, and it's hard, right? And like, knowing that, like, if I could wave a magic wand and never have a fight with my husband for the rest of my life, I'd be like, how much does it cost? Like, I'm on it, right? I don't want that to happen. If I could do that, I would do that. But I know I'm absolutely going to have another argument with my husband. Like, it's inevitable. And if I know that that's true with the person who I love the most, of course it's true with a complete stranger. Of course it's true with the people you work with. Of course it's true with your friends and your family. So just thinking about that. So one of the things that, again, like, I took away was that, like, when I actually started to ask myself what I could do for him, it like made it so much better in everything that came back to me. And I think a lot of that is also because, again, human behavior, like, we very much operate on this kind of reciprocal altruism type of code. Like, that's like the original core social contract between humans. And so, like, the doing for is something that, like, makes other people want to do for as well. And so it's like, when you increase these skills, you go on this journey, you get better at leveling up, you get better at being with and being in relationship with people. And then, like, it's like you're there and you're doing something for them, and they want to do something back to you. And so that's why I'm like, it just makes your life better, richer. Like, it's colorful, it's vibrant, it's the life that you want to have. Like, that's what's on the other side of going through all the pain and not just trying to skirt around it. Just go dive into it. Don't be afraid of it.
Yeah. Well, here's to that high fidelity life. I feel like a bit like this was a therapy session too. Like, there's so much wisdom in your words, Aniyia. And I think the way you apply this philosophy to your personal and professional life, it really feels like you've reached that level of self-actualization. And I'm so grateful that you shared all of that with us. I wasn't expecting it to be so personal, but as you say, this all begins with a personal journey. And for everyone who's listening, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Aniyia.
Yeah. Thank you.
I hope we can keep in touch with you. I'm sure there's so much more we can learn from each other.
Absolutely. You know where to find me. And I'm so glad that we did this. This was wonderful. Thank you, everyone who came and shared the space with us.
Amazing. Well, that's all for today on BoF Live. I'm Imran Amed, founder and CEO of the Business of Fashion. Stay tuned for more episodes of BoF Live. We're doing a few episodes every week now. Even though the lockdowns are over, you can still catch up with us and our favorite experts and thinkers and inspirational people from all around the world. That's all. Bye-bye.
Bye.